Have you ever wondered what it feels like to tie your boots in silence while the waves slap against the sides of a small boat, knowing full well that each knot might be your last? To hold your breath not because of fear, but because you're surrounded by 12 other men doing the same, and your heartbeat might betray your presence in the stillness? You're likely hearing this in a soft room, maybe late at night, nestled somewhere between the folds of sleep and drifting thoughts. Perhaps you're in New York, or Lahore, or curled up beneath a blanket in a quiet room where the fan hums, or the wind presses gently against the window pane. Wherever you are, you're safe. You're not surrounded by black water, by the ghostly outlines of warships, or the smell of rusted steel and salt in your nose. But tonight, let us quietly walk into that world, a slow, strange, and solemn world. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. These calm journeys need fellow travelers. And tell me, where are you listening from? Now, let us begin. Tonight, we enter June 6, 1944, D-Day. Our vessel is small, just a landing craft, bobbing with the rhythm of an indifferent sea, making its way toward the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc. Inside, it sit the men of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, U.S. Army. Rangers, they do not speak. Not because they're stoic, but because speaking would awaken a fear better left asleep. One of them, 22-year-old Willy Harden, is clutching his helmet with one hand and a crumpled letter from his mother. In the other, he's read it so many times, the ink has bled into the creases. Around his neck, a dog tag. Around his waist, a coil of rope. On his back, a weight of climbing gear and grenades. And in his eyes, something between resolve and sleep-like. A man trying to hold on to a dream while the world insists he wake up. The boat's engine hums in low bursts, and somewhere behind them, the dark silhouette of the USS Texas fades into the gray of dawn. The sky above is fog-thick and low, almost like it's trying to shield the sea from what's about to happen. The waves slap again and again, but softer now, like hesitant footsteps. On the cliffs ahead, the Germans wait, unaware of the names or faces of the men they'll soon try to erase. But they are ready. Bunkers, machine guns, artillery embedded like teeth in the rock. The Rangers know this. They know that once the ramp drops, time will fold in on itself. The sea, the sky, the sand, they will all vanish. There will only be now and the next step. Willy checks the straps on the ladder he's assigned to carry. It's not just a ladder, it's hope made of rope and steel, the only bridge between sea and fortress. It had been dropped earlier by Gauleiter, dragged ashore by hand, and now lies coiled and ready like a nervous animal. The men have smeared black grease across their faces, not to look fierce, but to dissolve into shadow. Names have been shortened to grunts. Emotions have been packed into the bottom of rucksacks. The ramp stays closed. A few more moments. Somewhere, a flare goes up, white light, erupting like a frozen star. And suddenly, time starts again. Machine gun fire rattles in the distance. The pilot of the boat shouts something, but no one hears. The engine groans. The ramp lowers. Salt water sprays. The beach is chaos, a mix of fire, wire, and cries. Willy doesn't run. No one does. They walk fast, low, bent forward like old. Men in a storm. The water is deeper than expected up to the chest, and it's cold enough to bite. One man slips and disappears. Another emerges with blood pouring from his arm, though he doesn't seem to notice. The sand isn't sand, it's mud, shattered with craters, thick with the dead. And the Rangers, in their wet boots and climbing gear, push forward, because the order was clear. Scale the cliffs. Take the guns. Hold until relieved. Willy's boots suck into the muck with each step, and his breath comes in short gasps now. His helmet bobs too low. He tightens the strap. A bullet passes close enough to part his hair. He doesn't look back. At the base of the cliff, the world narrows. It's not about America, or freedom, or flags. It's about this rope, this hook, this wall of rock smeared with seaweed and blood. He throws the rope up once. It doesn't catch. Again, it holds. He climbs. Below him, someone screams. Above him, the sky is red. The climb feels eternal. Each pull of the rope tears skin from his palms. Each rock shard slices fabric. The weight of the pack drags him down. His rifle is slow, banging against. His hip like a forgotten promise. But he climbs. And when he reaches the top, he doesn't yell. He just breathes. The first breath of a man who lived 1 second longer than he thought he would. Then he fires. He ducks. He rolls. He presses himself into the earth. The guns aren't where they thought. The intelligence was old. The mission shifts. Find the guns. Destroy them. Hold the position. Time dissolves. There's no clock on the battlefield. Only smoke. Willy writes nothing in his notebook, but he memorizes faces. Jenkins, who joked about the donuts back home. Hall, who hummed Swing Low under his breath. Morales, who carried a pocket Bible and a bottle of scotch. Some faces vanish too soon. Some stay only to disappear later. But in those first hours, something changes. The beach isn't a place anymore, it's a feeling. It's the taste of cordite, the scream of metal, the hum of a heart beating too fast. Willy becomes the cliff, still, anchored, watching, waiting. They hold. They wait for relief. But it doesn't come not yet. Night approaches. The bodies are cold. The sand is colder. The stars don't look down. They look away. Willy sits, with his back to a stone wall, cradling a shattered grenade that didn't explode. His fingers trace the smooth metal as if it were a seashell. He thinks of home, of his mother's kitchen, of his brother's laughter, of the wind on an empty street. But mostly, he thinks of silence. The kind that falls after the last shot. The kind that stretches across oceans and decades. And somewhere, just beyond that silence, the story continues. Because the truth of what it meant to be a ranger on D-Day doesn't live in the explosions. It lives in the quiet after. And that quiet is just beginning to speak. There's something strangely intimate about the way cold settles into a soldier's clothes. How it doesn't shout, doesn't announce itself with pain, but seeps in like old regret. Willy could feel it now, not as a sharp thing, but as a soft pressure under his ribs, between his shoulder blades, beneath his fingernails. The wind had picked up atop the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, brushing past the torn edges of uniforms, like it was looking for names to remember. The rangers who'd made it to the top were no longer charging. They were huddled, crouched, eyes darting across the rubble-strewn terrain where German bunkers once stood. The guns, as they'd feared, weren't there. Intelligence had been. Wrong, or perhaps just outdated by the time they arrived. The thick concrete casemates, shaped like crude teeth jutting from the land, were empty. Inside them, only rusted shell casings, a broken helmet, a German field manual with pages fluttering. In the sea breeze, no cannons, no gunners, just the memory of violence and the shadow of a new task. Find the guns. They had to be somewhere, still capable of raining death on the beaches below, where thousands of other Americans were landing, stumbling, dying. Willy moved with Sergeant Becker and 3 others down, a narrow dirt track that coiled behind the cliff's edge like a forgotten vein. Every footstep was tentative, not out of fear, but out of habit, because the soil here was laced with wires, booby traps, and things that pretended to be rocks but weren't. The hedgerows loomed on both sides, tall and thick, nature gone feral. After years of occupation, the air carried the scent of damp grass and scorched leather, and under it all, the faintest trace of cordite. Becker was an old man by Ranger standards, maybe 30, with a face that looked carved from boot leather, and eyes like cooled gun metal. He didn't talk much. When he did, the words came slow, as if weighed down by every soldier he'd trained and lost. They found the guns half a mile inland, hidden behind a camouflaged screen of leaves and netting, aimed not at the sea, but at the road that led inland, a surprise twist in a story already too complicated to tell. Massive French artillery pieces chained and braced, ready to be fired by a remote crew. There were no guards, no defenders, just steel monsters sleeping in a field of tall grass. Becker didn't pause. He handed Willy a thermite grenade. "Your turn," he said, voice low, almost apologetic. Willy approached the first cannon like one might approach an altar. He knelt, pulled the pin, and placed the grenade into the breech. A hiss, a flash. The smell of burning magnesium was sharper than anything else he'd smelled that day. He repeated it 3, 4 times until the guns were crippled, smoking, their barrels melted and useless. For a moment, he just stood there, blinking into the wind. No cheer, no fist pump, just the realization that the guns were dead, but the war wasn't. As they made their way back toward the cliff, the silence began to swell again. It was the silence of knowing you've done your job, but the job isn't done. Back on the bluff, more rangers were arriving, some limping, some carried, some dazed. One man, Private Lutz, had lost his helmet and his rifle, but clutched a harmonica he hadn't played since basic training. He sat against a crater and blew a note, just one, before shaking his head and tucking it away. The moment wasn't right. The wind, however, seemed to pick up the sound and carry it anyway, like a memory too soft to keep, but too strong to let go. A medic named Harlan moved from man to man like a ghost in khaki, checking pulses, whispering comfort, never flinching, never flinching. Willy found himself staring at the stars. They didn't seem to belong to this world. They were too pure, too aloof. Did they see this often? Had they witnessed other beaches, other boys? Or did they simply reflect the light and leave the rest? To us? Someone passed him a ration can, cold beans, no label, dented. He ate without tasting, the act more ritual than sustenance. Nearby, someone began softly telling a joke, the kind of slow, meandering story that doesn't need a punchline. The laughter that followed was strange, like a door creaking open in a haunted house, but it was laughter all the same. They had held the point. They had destroyed the guns. They were, for the moment, not dead, but sleep did not come. It hovered just out of reach, like a lover refusing one final kiss. Willy lay on his back, eyes open, fingers twitching with ghost. Movements tugging rope, checking clips, brushing away non-existent dirt. He thought of his father's old fishing trips, of tying knots in the dark before the sun came up. Funny, he thought, how life prepares you for things without ever telling you what it's preparing you for. A flare lit the horizon again. No. Sound, just a sudden pale glow. The Germans weren't done. Not by a long shot. And yet, in that moment, under that sterile burst of light, Willy felt not peace, but something like it. An acceptance. The kind that grows in the soil of exhaustion. Watered by duty. He would fight again, climb again, breathe, crawl, hide, run, maybe even bleed again. But he had climbed the cliff. He had reached the top. And now, whatever happened, no one could take that away from him. But the real test, what happened after the slow unraveling of days into nights, of men into memories, that was just beginning. And it would carry on, quietly, softly, like a tide that refuses to leave the shore dot. It's a strange thing how memory behaves. When the body is still, can the world around you moves like fog on a moor, slow, shapeless, yet heavy with presence. Willy didn't know if he had slept. The rangers had no clocks on the cliffs, no watches that hadn't stopped from seawater or shrapnel. Time was measured by the number of times one blinked, by the rhythm of distant artillery, by the whisper of someone asking softly, "Are you still with me?" Dawn hadn't quite broken, but the sky above the English Channel was no longer ink. It was ash. The kind of color you see just before snow, but there would be no snow today. Just more walking, more searching, more waiting for something, and order, an attack, a letter that wouldn't come. Some of the rangers had started digging shallow foxholes into the rocky bluff, using dull entrenching tools and their bare hands. It wasn't for protection as much as for comfort, for the illusion of doing something, anything, to create a bubble of control in a landscape that offered none. Willy sat beside one such hole, legs drawn to his chest, rifle across his knees. Like a slumbering pet, the barrel was caked in sand and flecked with dried blood that wasn't his. He'd tried cleaning it, but the cloth was soaked from last night's climb, and in the end, the dirt didn't matter. What mattered was readiness, always readiness. Across from him, a young private named Emmett muttered something in his sleep. His lips twitched, and for a moment he smiled. Willy wondered what dream had found its way into that battered head. Something warm, something pre-war, perhaps a girl with ribbons in her hair, or the scent of oranges in July, or perhaps the dream was darker, more tangled. Willy didn't ask. He simply watched the boy's fingers curl around the strap of his helmet like a child clutching a blanket. A low rumble echoed from the sea, a ship, probably, or distant shelling, but it didn't feel threatening. It felt like the earth's exhale. Then came the quiet shuffle of boots. Sergeant Becker appeared, carrying a map wrapped in waterproof canvas. He unfolded it like it was parchment from another century, pointing with a knuckle to a scribbled red line. "New objective," he whispered. "We move inland. No fanfare. No dramatic announcement. Just another shift in the journey." The rangers gathered slowly, words spreading like ripples in a pond. They didn't rush. Movement had become an art of silence. No clanging gear, no loud commands. Even their breathing had softened, sensed. They walked through broken hedgerows and past cratered fields. Chickens scattered at their approach, wild and unattended. A bicycle lay in a ditch, bent and rusting, its wheels still spinning in the breeze. Here and there, French villagers peered from shuttered windows, offering no words, only nods. Not of welcome, but of recognition. The Americans were here. The boys had arrived. In a barn near the village of Grand Camp, the rangers paused. It was a skeleton of a building, half its roof missing, hay blackened from fire. Willy stepped inside and saw something he hadn't expected. A shoe. Just one, small, brown, clearly. A child's. It sat upright in a corner, as if waiting for its owner. No blood, no footprints, just stillness. He didn't touch it. He simply looked and then moved on. In another corner, someone found an old gramophone. Incredibly, it still worked. A scratchy French tune burst forth, something cheerful from another lifetime. The men didn't dance, but a few swayed, smiling. It was absurd, but in war, absurdity is often a refuge. Private Lutz finally pulled out that harmonica and played along quietly, tentatively. Music, broken as it was, stitched something together. For a moment, outside, clouds gathered, thick and gray. Rain came not hard, but steady. A soft reminder from the sky that it, too, remembered sorrow. The rangers pressed on, following cart tracks and the remnants of German signs hastily crossed out. Booby traps slowed them. Mine made every step a question. Willy thought of how much effort had gone into making the world dangerous wires buried, tripwires hidden, entire trees rigged to explode. And yet, here they were, walking carefully as though through a dream with sharp teeth. They passed a church whose bell had fallen and cracked open the floor. The pews were burned. But in the middle of the ash sat a single candle still upright, untouched. Someone lit it. No one said a word. As night approached, the rangers bivouacked in a thicket, surrounded by the smells of wet earth and rotting leaves. Rain trickled down their backs and into their socks. But no one complained. Complaining took energy, and energy was reserved for breathing. Willy lay flat against the roots of a twisted oak, eyes tracing the branches above. He remembered how, as a child, he used to climb trees and pretend he was a bird watcher. Now he watched the sky for something else flares. Aircraft, signals that didn't belong to nature. A fox wandered into camp. Thin, ribs showing, its tail curled with nervous energy. It looked at them. They looked back. Then it vanished. In war, even animals behave like ghosts. That night, someone shared a story about a ranger who once climbed the fire escape of a Chicago boarding house just to surprise his girlfriend with flowers. Another told of the time he slept through a training grenade drill and woke up buried under sandbags. The stories weren't funny, but they made the men smile in the dark. Willy didn't speak. He just listened. And when silence returned, it was not empty. It was full of all the things they couldn't say. The moon never came out. The stars hid behind the clouds. And yet, in the dark, the rangers held their positions. Not because they were brave, but because there was no other choice. The cliff was far behind now. The beach was no longer in sight. But the mission fluid, elusive, essential pressed forward. And with it, their quiet, steady march continued. Toward something unknown, but no longer entirely unimaginable. There is a kind of silence that comes not from the absence of sound, but from the presence of too much listening. The rangers moved through the Normandy countryside like shadows stitched into the land, their boots soaked, their weapons clutched close, not with fear, but with reverence, like carrying a burden that could speak at any moment. Willy couldn't. Remember the last time someone had raised their voice. Orders were given in gestures, now a finger to the left, a palm to the ground, a wave that meant stop and wait and listen, all at once. Trees dripped from last night's rain. The ground squelched softly, mud pulling at soles as if to say, "Stay here, rest." But rest was a mirage. Even when they stopped to eat, the chewing was quiet, more mechanical than satisfying. A man bit into a stale biscuit and smiled faintly. "Tastes like every cafeteria back home," he murmured, and someone chuckled, not loudly, but with the dry breath of a man who'd almost forgotten how laughter worked. The village of Travers was their next point of interest, half ruined, half living. Smoke still curled from a bakery chimney, but every house had at least one wall missing, like toys dismantled by a careless child. The church bell lay crumpled. In the square, its twisted frame oddly beautiful in the rising mist. Children peeked from behind cracked shutters, eyes wide, unblinking. One girl held a ragdoll with a missing face. She waved once, just once, and disappeared behind the wood. Willy thought of his niece, who used to pretend to be a nurse for her dolls, bandaging them in strips of toilet paper, humming lullabies, with made-up words. In Travers, the Germans had left quickly, but not quietly. Traps were left behind grenades tucked into drawers, wires under floorboards, food left poisoned on tables as cruel invitations. A sergeant from another unit lost both hands opening a door. The rangers buried him quietly behind the chapel, marking the grave with a stick tied with a bootlace. There were no ceremonies, only stillness, and still they moved on. As they reached the outskirts of the village, Willy noticed a tree whose bark had been carved with initials, JG plus MB, 1942. The carving was neat, deep, a promise etched into flesh. He paused for a moment, tracing the letters with one gloved finger. A promise made before war, possibly broken by it. As they moved into the woods beyond, the terrain changed. The forest here was thick, tangled, older than the war itself. The kind of place where sound didn't travel well, and light arrived only in fragments. Willy's breath grew shallower, not from exertion, but from instinct. Something about the trees, how they watched. Then came the whistle, a high, thin shriek that pierced the air and made every man freeze in his tracks. Mortar. The first one landed in a shallow depression behind them, sending a spray of dirt and leaves. The next, closer. The third, too close. Someone screamed. Another stumbled. But the instinct for cover was already drilled in shoulder, roll, crawl. Willy found himself behind a fallen log, heart hammering, mouth dry. Dirt coated his tongue. Like ash. He peered over and saw Emmett, face down, not moving. Willy's stomach turned. He wanted to run, to check, but movement meant risk, meant attention. Becker's voice hissed from behind another stump. Stay low. Count 10, then move. The shelling lasted only a minute, but it stretched like honey in the mind, slow, sticky, endless. When it stopped, the silence was not relief. It was anticipation. They moved again, slower now, every footfall a prayer. The Germans had pulled back, but not far. A machine gun nest opened up from the left. The Rangers fanned out, returning fire in bursts. No shouting. No heroics. Just the rhythm of survival pop, duck, scan, breathe. Willy found himself crawling toward a fallen tree where a German soldier lay dying. He couldn't have been older. Then 19. Blood soaked his tunic, and his hand clutched a photograph. 2 smiling women, a child, a dog, the enemy. And yet not a monster, just a boy who had once laughed, once loved. Willy didn't take the photo. He didn't touch the body. He just moved on, the image burning itself into his memory like a negative in film. By dusk, the forest had become a graveyard of echoes. Crows circled overhead. Somewhere, someone played a few notes on a mouth harpsoft, off-key. No one minded. The Rangers set up in a hollow beneath a ridge, passing around canteens, sharing ration chocolate that had long since turned gray. Willy bit into his piece and let it melt, not for taste, but for the feel of something disappearing slowly, gently. He looked at the men around him, mud-covered, sleep-starved, faces sharp with edge and blur. They looked older now, not aged, but weathered, like driftwood shaped by storm and sun. Someone spoke of a girl back home who used to leave notes in his jacket pocket. Another described the smell of his father's garage, the oil, the wood, the faint tang of sawdust. They weren't telling stories to each other. They were reminding themselves that they had once belonged to something else. That night, under a sliver of moon, Willy wrote in his pocket journal. Nothing fancy, just lines. Still here. Found the guns. Emmett's gone. Saw a fox again. Cold. He didn't know who he'd give it to. Maybe no one. But the act of writing was like breathing. In ink, it made the night smaller. And before sleep finally crept in slow, cautious, like a stranger asking permission, Willy heard Becker say softly, to no one in particular, "We're ghosts with rifles now." It wasn't meant to scare. It was a lullaby, a truth spoken, too late in the evening to be argued. And in that soft, haunting dark, the cliffs of Normandy felt like a memory fading behind them, as they stepped deeper into a land where silence walked beside them like an old friend. What came next was unknown, but they would keep moving one slow, weary step at a time. Sleep, when it finally came, did not arrive like a curtain falling. It came like fog slipping under a door, like a hush inside the chest, pressing gently. until the edges of the world grew soft and indistinct. For Willy, the dreams that followed were not of home or peace or laughter. They were of rope, wet boots, narrow cliffs, and footsteps without echo. When he stirred, hours later or perhaps only minutes, he found his legs numb and his fingers cramped around the cold grip of his rifle. Around him, the forest was still breathing. Crows croaked softly in the canopy above. Somewhere nearby, water dripped from a broken leaf into a shallow pool, each drop like a second, falling into a deep, unseen clock. Sergeant Becker was already up, sipping cold coffee from a blackened tin and staring at nothing in particular. He didn't look at Willy, just said quietly, "We move in 10. And that was that. Orders didn't need formality anymore. They were less command and more ritual. The men rose one by one, stretching limbs like branches grown too long in winter, groaning softly without complaint. Some limped, some winced, and some simply stared, empty-eyed, until the body remembered how to move. They began their march again through broken trails, past burnt-out vehicles now half swallowed by mud and moss. The road ahead curved toward the small farming town of Couvains, though the Rangers did not expect it to be peaceful. The Germans had begun their counterattacks. All over the front, whispers moved faster than bullets. Panzer divisions, 88s, snipers. In bell towers, the quiet had grown sharp, like a held breath that refused to be exhaled. Willy walked at the edge of the line, scanning the fields to his left. He saw cows, dead and bloated, flies orbiting them like lazy satellites. Once, he caught a glimpse of a scarecrow still standing in a field of flattened wheat. It wore a hat too large for its head, and someone, perhaps a retreating soldier, had painted a crude face on it with charcoal. Its eyes were too round. Its grin is too wide. Willy looked away quickly. They reached the outskirts of Couvains near noon. The sun, though pale, was high overhead, casting weak light through a quilt of thin clouds. Smoke still rose from several buildings. Shells had hit the town days earlier, but the Rangers didn't know what remained inside. They approached like archaeologists, slowly, methodically, each step both an excavation and a gamble. The first building they entered had once been a schoolhouse. Tiny desks were overturned, chalk still faintly visible on the board, conjugations of French verbs, and the date June 3rd. Only 3 days ago, but it felt like centuries. On the floor was a single blood-streaked ruler. Emmett would have joked. Willy thought that it finally measured something important. But Emmett was gone, and the ruler remained silent. In a narrow alley behind the school, a mine detonated. Not a large one, just enough to shred the lower half of Private Owen's leg. He didn't scream, not loudly. Just a sharp inhale, like someone stepping into cold water. The medics worked fast, wrapping, binding, whispering promises they didn't. No, they could keep. Owen stayed conscious, his face pale but composed. "Tell my brother I didn't cry," he said. No one corrected him. They evacuated him by jeep later that evening, back toward the shore, toward a hospital that may or may not still be standing. Afterward, no one spoke of it. They moved forward, as if moving forward was a kind of respect. In the town square, they found something odd, a table, hastily set for dinner. Bread, cheese, and wine, untouched. 3 chairs. No people. The food was dusty, but fresh enough. It looked like someone had expected guests who never arrived, or who had arrived too quickly. Willy stared at the place settings. A knife lay sideways across one plate. A bottle was uncorked. There were crumbs in the folds of a linen napkin. He didn't eat. No one did. But they stood there silently, as though paying their respects to ghosts made of breadcrumbs and unfinished toasts. That night, they slept in the remnants of a train station. The roof was gone, the tracks bent like melted bones. Pigeons cooed in the rafters, undisturbed by war. Willy lay on the stone floor, staring up at the stars framed by the collapsed beams. He thought about the tracks, how they used to go somewhere. He remembered riding trains as a boy, counting trees as they flashed by the window, pretending each stop was a new country. Now the only destination was forward, and forward held no maps. Somewhere to the east, flares rose again dull red against the night. The war never slept, but the Rangers did, in pieces. An hour here, a dose there. They guarded each other's sleep in rotations, moving like monks through the shadows. Willy's turn came near midnight. He sat at the station entrance, rifle across. His lap, eyes scanning the street outside. Rain began again, light, steady, more like mist. In its rhythm, he heard patterns. Not words, exactly, but something close. Like the tapping of a friend on the shoulder, or a memory trying to be remembered. In the distance, a dog barked. Then silence again, just breathing, just waiting. And as he sat there, blinking slowly, drifting between watchfulness and wonder, Willy felt a presence, not enemy, not ghost, but history itself. Thick and quiet, sitting beside him like an old man who had seen too much and spoke only in sighs. And somewhere inside that silence, tomorrow was beginning to stir. The morning began not with gunfire, but with the faint rustle of birds returning to a town that had forgotten it had trees. Couvains, under the thin light of dawn, looked less like a battlefield and more like the broken skeleton of a forgotten. Storybook chimneys leaning like crooked fingers, shutters clinging by one hinge, and a fountain in the square that still burbled, as if unaware that the war had happened at all. The Rangers stirred in their corners of the ruined train station, each waking differently, some with a stretch and groan, others with eyes snapping open, as though they'd been listening to dreams spoken in enemy code. Willy awoke with a crick in his neck and the taste of rust in his mouth. The rain had stopped, leaving behind puddles that reflected the twisted sky in gray fragments. No one spoke until Becker stood, cleared his throat, and muttered, "Another mile, maybe two." That was enough. The group packed their gear quietly, efficiently, like stagehands resetting a haunted play, and moved out past the edge of town, toward a road flanked by poplars that leaned like sentinels too tired to stand straight. The destination was unclear. Rumors had reached them in whispers, passed from unit to unit. German reinforcements massing near St. Lay, paratroopers lost in orchards, a tank column ambushed by French resistance fighters wielding nothing but fuel cans and matchsticks. Truth, in war, arrived tattered and late, like letters without envelopes. The road curved gently, lined with debris that was neither fully natural nor fully man-made, a child's boot next to a shattered radio, a bicycle wheel tangled in barbed wire, a field of cabbages that had been trampled flat under boot and tread. The Rangers moved through it all, their boots pressing fresh stories into the mud. Around mid-morning, they passed a cart turned on its side, its wheels still spinning in the breeze. Inside the cart was a violin case, unopened, with a small note. Pinned to the handle. Poor jewels. No one touched it. Even in war, there were artifacts too sacred to disturb. They walked in pairs, then singles, clumps again, the rhythm broken by small pauses to rest or listen. The silence was not empty. It was filled with listening, the way forests listen after snowfall. Suddenly, a gunshot. Sharp, close, real. Everyone dropped, instinct blooming faster than thought. Another shot, then silence again. A sniper, somewhere above. Perhaps in the abandoned mill that loomed nearby, its upper window cracked like a lazy eye. Becker gestured. 2 Rangers flanked left. Willy and another, Sergeant Keene, flanked right. They moved through tall grass, careful not to bend it too sharply, careful not to breathe too loudly. The mill loomed larger, its stone walls stained. With time, Keen whispered, "I'll go up. Cover me." He didn't wait for Willy to agree. He just moved. Willy knelt, sighted the window, breath held like it might shatter if released. A moment passed, then another, then a flash. A figure peered in the window, raising a rifle. Willy fired. The glass shattered, and the figure dropped. Everything slowed. Keen called up, voice flat, clear. They entered together. The stairs were narrow, lined with spiderwebs and the scent of rotted flour. At the top, the sniper lay sprawled, face turned toward the corner, no older than 19. A photo had fallen from his jacket pocket. A girl smiling, holding a dog. Willy stared. The same kind of photo every man carried. The same smile. The same loss. Keen found a rusted can of coffee in a cupboard. He pocketed it. Still warm, he muttered. Back outside, the others had resumed movement. War doesn't pause for grief, only nods at it and moves on. They marched on, slower now, eyes scanning rooftops and windows. Every shadow was a question. Every breeze is a warning. In the afternoon, they reached a barn at the edge of a small hamlet. Smoke curled from inside fresh. A trap or something else? Becker raised his hand. They fanned out, rifles ready. Willy approached the door, heart steady. He opened it slowly. Inside, an old man sat on a stool, stirring a pot over a makeshift stove. He looked up, blinked once, and nodded. "Americans," he said in a whisper-thick French accent. "You're?" Late. Laughter erupted. Soft, sudden, absurd. The old man offered food potatoes, something stewed, bread that crumbled when touched. The Rangers ate, not because they were hungry, but because someone offered. That made it sacred. Willy sat near the barn door, chewing slowly, watching the fields outside. Poppies had started to grow again. Red, bright, defiant. He wondered how long they'd been waiting underground. The old man lit a pipe and told them of the Germans, how they came at night, took eggs, took blankets, took sons. He had hidden his grandson under the floorboards. "Still there," he said, tapping the wood. "But he doesn't speak anymore." No one asked why. As night fell, the Rangers stayed in the barn. Some slept on hay, others on cold earth. Willy found a ladder and climbed to the loft. From there, he could see the road behind them, empty, winding, unreal. He wrote in his journal again. Saw a poppy. Keen shot the sniper. Barn food. The French boy doesn't speak. He paused, then added, Sunset looked normal. Outside, the frogs began to sing. Someone snored. Someone wept softly into his arm. Willy listened to it all, not with ears, but with skin, with memory, with something deeper than language. He thought of how strange it was to measure survival in potatoes and photographs. He closed his eyes, and in the hush between breaths, between barn boards creaking in wind, slipping through cracks, he felt the day fold itself away like a letter never sent. The war was still around them thick, waiting, but for this hour, for this space, it had stepped back. And in that breath, tomorrow waited quietly, just out of reach. Sometimes the scariest part of war isn't the gunfire, it's the quiet. Afterward, the way the world holds its breath too long, as if unsure whether to keep turning. Morning returned with a softness that felt borrowed, almost unearned. Willy blinked awake in the loft of the barn, his neck stiff, his limbs tangled. In the hay, like the roots of a tired tree. For a brief, sleepy moment, he forgot where he was. The smell of warm wood, the distant cluck of a chicken, the low creak of timber beams, it all belonged to some distant, peaceful past. But then came the smell of boots, gun oil, sweat. War, like gravity, never lets you forget for long. Down, below, the other rangers were already moving with that slow, methodical rhythm they'd all adopted. Half awake, half alert, always moving. Sergeant Becker was outside, kneeling by the old man's garden, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick, explaining something that looked like a patrol route. The Frenchman, pipe clenched between his teeth, simply nodded and tapped his boot in time with Becker's words. The boy who lived under the floorboards still hadn't come out. Some things even hope can't coax into daylight. The unit's next objective was an old German communication post a few kilometers east. It had been abandoned, intelligence said, but nothing about war was ever just abandoned. It was either forgotten, booby-trapped, or both. They left the barn with full canteens, bread stuffed in pockets, and heads slightly higher than the day before. Even in exhaustion, kindness can lift the spine. They moved along back roads and narrow lanes, passing the remains of carts and farm, tools repurposed for barricades. In one ditch, a typewriter lay on its side, a single piece of paper still trapped inside, though rain had long since blurred the words. Willy looked closer. One word remained clear: souvenir. He didn't touch it. He just kept walking. Fields rolled out on either side, some filled with cabbages, others charred and empty. The hedgerows grew thicker again, enclosing them in green tunnels that smelled of moss and cordite. The world here was damp, alive, and nervous. Birds darted. Overhead, always in pairs. It made Willy think of messages, of winged things sent into the sky with hope and trembling. The Combs post came into view by midday, an ugly brick building hunched behind a line of sandbags, its windows broken, its roof half caved. They approached cautiously, rifles raised, breath held. Inside, they found nothing but the remains of panic. Desks overturned, wires severed, maps scattered like confetti. One phone still dangled off the hook. Willy picked it up, held it to his ear. Nothing, just the soft crackle of emptiness. He gently set it back down. On one wall, someone had drawn a rough sketch of the Eiffel Tower and scrawled the word, "Bintet soon." Becker ordered a sweep. Willy and Private Lutz searched the basement, their boots echoing against the cold stone. In a side room, they found crates of rations, a crate of unused boots, and a photograph tacked to the wall. A German officer with a girl on each arm, all smiles, all style, all gone now. The building had stories, none of them finished. Upstairs, someone found a radio still intact. Lutz fiddled with the dials, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, they caught a broadcast. Not German, English, music, scratchy but unmistakable. A jazz trumpet, soft and lazy, like someone playing just to themselves. The Rangers froze, smiling in disbelief. For 30 seconds, they listened, not as soldiers, but as humans. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Static returned. The moment evaporated, but something had been left behind. A kind of glue, Becker muttered, will hold here for the night. The building was defensible, cracked but solid. Willy took the second-floor window as his post, propping his rifle on a ledge that had once held flowers. Outside, the land stretched fields, smoke, scattered barns, sky. Nothing moved, and yet everything did. Time, especially. Willy wrote in his journal, "Heard jazz. Found boots. Bintet. Boy is still hiding. I think the moon's getting closer." That night, someone made tea from wild herbs found behind. The building. It tasted of grass and memory. They passed the cup around. No one said it was good, but no one said it wasn't. In the hallway, Someone drew a chalk line and started writing names: Emmett, Owens, Moore, a roll call of the vanished. No one touched it afterward. It just stayed there, a white line that grew slowly longer. Around midnight, Willy heard a sound faint, deliberate. Not gunfire, not boots, a piano. Just a few notes, somewhere beyond the building, carried faintly on the wind. No one else seemed to hear. He didn't mention it. Sometimes war plays. Tricks. Sometimes memories borrow other senses. He listened anyway, eyes half closed, as if waiting for the next note might somehow carry them all home. The darkness outside was velvet now, thick but forgiving. A few stars returned. The breeze grew colder, but not cruel. Willy wrapped his coat tighter, lay his head against the wall, and watched the empty field sway. The world wasn't healing. Not yet, but it was remembering how to breathe again. And in that breath, long and slow and quiet as the night itself, the Rangers prepared for another step forward, into whatever tomorrow would whisper. Next dawn came not with fanfare, but with a careful lifting of darkness, as if the sky itself was folding back a blanket too slowly, trying not to wake what lay beneath. Willy blinked into the early light, eyes gritty, muscles stiff. The air outside the old German communication post still smelled faintly of wire insulation, scorched wood, and wet stone. Somewhere in the distance, roosters crowed not defiantly, but like tired old men clearing their throats. The Rangers stirred one by one, their faces half lit by the dim gray slant of morning. Breakfast was a half ration of powdered eggs and black coffee brewed in a dented mess tin that had seen too many fires. No one said it tasted good. No one expected it to. They ate quickly, mechanically, like feeding an engine that no longer cared for fuel, but still demanded motion. Becker studied the map again, creases deep, ink faded, margins scribbled with coordinates and cryptic initials. The next location was a rail junction north of St. Andre. The Germans had been using it to move armor, the rumor said. But rumors were like mist, always changing shape, never meant to be held. They set off in 2 columns along a hedgerow path that zigzagged through wheat fields and wildflowers. Poppies again. Too many. Too red. Willy tried not to look. A farmer's dog trailed them for nearly half a mile, silent, curious, ribs showing. It didn't bark. It simply watched, head cocked slightly, like trying to understand what these strange creatures were and why they moved without singing. In one field, they passed an overturned wagon still filled with carrots, now half rotten. Flies rose in slow spirals. Life in pieces. By midday, the heat returned, not the warmth of summer, but the suffocating heaviness of too many bodies moving through too little air. Helmets grew hot. Collars itched. One man tied a handkerchief around his neck and muttered something about Alabama. No one replied. Some homes they passed were intact, their curtains still fluttering. Others were burned out, the remains of toys and teacups scattered like memories, trying to take root in the soil. At one corner, a bicycle leaned perfectly upright against a gate. On its seat, a hat, neatly folded. Someone had left in a hurry, but they had paused long enough to place that hat. Why? Was it a signal? A goodbye? A prayer? Willy didn't ask. He just noted it. He was collecting moments now, not just movements. Around mid-afternoon, they spotted the junction. It was surrounded by thick hedges and rusted fencing, with a small outbuilding that looked like a guardhouse. Becker raised his hand, then signaled. 3 men to flank left, 3 to the right. Willy was with the center group, edging through tall grass, his rifle barrel cutting a narrow path. From inside the structure came a sound scraping, then a cough. Becker gave the go-ahead. They moved. The door burst open, and a German soldier stumbled out, hands raised, unarmed, his face pale as paper. Behind him, Two others followed, one limping, the other looking barely old enough to shave. They had surrendered before a shot was fired. The Rangers searched the building. Empty crates, a few maps, an abandoned radio. In the corner, a kettle is still warm. These men hadn't planned to fight. They had simply waited until it was safe to stop pretending. Becker questioned them briefly through a translator. One word kept coming up: mood. Tired. Not scared. Tired. The kind of tired that weighs the bones, not just the skin. The prisoners were tied loosely and left with a guard while the rest of the Rangers searched the area. Willy found a set of tracks leading toward a line of trees fresh, heavy like tank treads. He followed them a few yards and found nothing but a crumpled raincoat, German issue, with a cigarette still tucked behind the collar. Another memory, folded and left behind. Back at the junction, someone found a tin of hard candy hidden behind a panel. Becker broke it into pieces and passed them out like communion. Willy let his mouth melt slowly, letting the sugar coat his tongue like a story trying not to end. That night, they dug in near a shallow creek. It gurgled quietly, its banks overgrown with reeds. The water was clear, cold, and sweet. Someone carved a tiny fish from a twig and set it afloat. It spun lazily, caught in the current, then disappeared. Sleep came in shifts. Willy stayed up late, watching the moon rise through a gap in the trees. It looked closer than usual, swollen and yellow, like it had come to check on them. He opened his journal, captured 3, found tracks, too many poppies, hat on bike. He paused, then added, moon is kind tonight. Nearby, a soft snore, the creak of boots adjusting, a cough stifled with a sleeve. These sounds were the lullaby now, a soldier's symphony of persistence. Willy leaned back, closed his eyes for just a moment, and let the air fill his chest like it was something earned. The war still pulsed beyond the hills. But for now, it was only them, the creek, the grass, a gentle burden of memory. And somewhere just ahead, wrapped in shadow, tomorrow waited like a letter with no address, yet destined to arrive. There's a moment just before true sleep ends, when the body knows it's still safe, but the mind starts listening again, uncertain whether to wake fully or stay folded inside a dream. That was the moment Willy drifted out of. The sky above the shallow creek was pale and peach-colored, like someone had dipped the edges of morning in warm milk. Mist rolled lazily over the grass, curling between bedrolls and boots, as if trying to read the dog tags of the living. The Rangers rose slowly, like weeds warmed by sunlight, stiff-limbed and quiet. No one said, "Good morning." In war, such words felt borrowed from another world. Instead, nods were exchanged, and movements began checking weapons, tying laces, refilling canteens in the stream. A bird chirped near Willy's boot and flew off, startled by the sound of someone sneezing. It was almost funny. Almost. Becker passed around a folded paper with scrawled instructions. Rendezvous point near the village of Saint-Germain-de-Talavendi. Then hold position for artillery crews to move in behind them. The idea was simple. The execution would not be. The trail ahead was overgrown, full of low shrubs and rusted wire fences that had once marked cow pastures and were now used to snare ankles and break spirits. The men moved through them like ghosts, each careful step its negotiation with the ground. Along the way, they passed a burned-out car half buried in mud. The driver's door was open. Inside was a French newspaper from early May. On the cover, a smiling bride and groom. The ink had run from the rain, leaving their faces blurred, but their hands were still joined. The engine had melted into itself. A tree nearby bore a red X painted by someone French. German? The war didn't leave tags on its work. Around mid-morning, they encountered resistance, not a large group, just 4 German soldiers hiding in the shell of a bakery. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes, but felt longer. One bullet took Lutz in the shoulder. He didn't fall immediately, just looked confused, like he'd forgotten the script. He was patched up quickly. Becker said, "He'll be fine." He said it twice. The bakery smelled of burnt flour and oil. Loaves still sat on blackened trays. One had been bitten once and left. A mouse darted across the counter, unfazed by men or bullets. In the back room, Willy found a book something about herbs. Its spine cracked, but its pages mostly intact. He tucked it into his pack without thinking. It wasn't useful, but something about the idea of green things growing still mattered. As they moved on, a drizzle began, soft and almost apologetic. Helmets caught the drops like church bells catching whispers. The path curved past a graveyard old, overgrown, moss thick on the names. One stone had a small toy soldier placed. At its base, the uniform was painted blue. Willy paused. It wasn't one of theirs. Someone local had left it. A boy, perhaps. Or a grandfather remembering. Becker called out softly. Time to move. By noon, the village came into view, tucked into a dip in the land, like a secret someone had buried gently. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. A cow chewed lazily behind a broken fence. But there was no movement, no people in the open. Becker signaled. A halt. The rangers fanned out, checking doors, peeking into windows, every hand ready. In one home, the table was set for dinner plates, forks, napkins folded into triangles. A candle had burned down to a wax puddle. A record player sat silent, in the corner. In another house, a piano stood against a cracked wall. Someone had drawn a smiley face into the dust on one key. No sheet music, just dust, just memory. The rangers set up in what remained of the town hall, a square, squat building with a rusted flagpole and bullet holes like freckles. Willy took up position at the west-facing window, overlooking the road they'd come from. Across from him, a shop window displayed faded wedding dresses. One had a lace sleeve still floating gently in the breeze. That night, the men rested in shifts. Lutz, bandaged and pale, tried to hum a song but forgot the words halfway through. Someone else threw a coin at a cracked mirror and said, 7 more years of this. Soft laughter followed, not joyful, but grateful. Before his shift, Willy sat on the stairs and opened the herb book. Between the pages, pressed and yellowed, he found a single-leaf lavender. Fragile, dry, still fragrant. He didn't know why it was there. Maybe someone had saved it for luck. Maybe someone had forgotten it. He placed it in his journal and wrote, "Mouse in bakery." Blue soldier on the grave. Lavender. Lutz, okay. He didn't add more. The day had already told its own story. Outside, the drizzle continued, too light to soak, too constant to ignore. And in that hush of damp wood, slow breath, and shared glances, the rangers waited not for glory, not even for orders. They waited for the war to blink first. And in that pause between lightning and thunder, something like peace moved quietly through the cracks. The rain had finally stopped, but the air still felt soaked with silence. Not just the absence of sound, but that heavy, invisible pressure. That fills a room when something has happened or is about to. In the early morning, the village of Saint-Germain-de-Talavendi looked like a ghost had passed through it overnight. Leaves clung to rooftops. Puddles reflected fractured clouds. The wedding dresses in the shop window, across the road from Willy's post, swayed slightly in the breeze, sleeves fluttering like shy hands. There was no wind. Not really. Just the slow breathing of a land, unsure if it could exhale again. The rangers woke as they always did now. Slowly, automatically, without ceremony. Lutz's bandage had soaked through, but he insisted he could still walk. No one argued. In war, denial was its kind of strength. Becker briefed them over a map torn in half and reassembled with tape. Reconnaissance orders eastbound. Find a vantage point on the ridge beyond the orchard. Mark German artillery positions if any remained, and hold for further instruction. The walk to the orchard took an hour, maybe more. Time bent strangely in those days, moving in loops and dragging its feet like a tired mule. They passed a garden of smashed tomato plants, a child swing still swaying, a dog collar nailed to a tree with no explanation. Everything whispered a story, but none of the voices were loud enough to finish their sentences. When they reached the orchard, the fruit trees stood in rows like patient mourners, green and gnarled, bearing half-ripe apples clinging stubbornly to the branches. Willy touched one tree's bark with his palm. It was still warm from the mooring. Sun and rough like a soldier's face after 3 days without shaving. They moved in, cautiously, checking every trunk, every shadow. At the edge of the orchard was a stone wall, low and crumbling, overgrown with ivy. Beyond it, the ridge. And beyond the ridge, the road to via a gray ribbon slicing through the countryside. Willy and 2 others crawled up the slope to peek over the crest. The view opened like a forgotten painting. Farmhouses tucked into hills, smoke drifting from one chimney, 2 German trucks parked at a distance, unmanned, and something else, a horse, white with gray speckles, standing perfectly still in the middle of a field as if waiting for someone who would never return. They marked the coordinates on a scrap of ration box cardboard and radioed it back. The artillery crews behind the lines would handle the rest. Their job now was to wait. Waiting in combat was a different kind of endurance. It wasn't like standing in line or watching a clock. It was more like holding your breath for an entire afternoon, trying not to blink. In the shade of the orchard, they took shifts watching the road. Becker shared half a bar of chocolate he'd saved. It tasted like cardboard wrapped in memory. Lutz leaned against a tree and told a story about stealing eggs from a neighbor's coop as a boy and getting chased by a goat. Willy smiled. The goat felt more real than the war for a moment, and that was enough. Later, they found a canvas bag tucked under one of the trees. Inside, 5 green apples, slightly bruised, and a letter in French that none of them could read. The apples were split among them. The letter was tucked into Willy's journal, just because. As dusk approached, clouds thickened again, casting a golden bruise across the sky. A farmer approached from the east, hands raised, eyes cautious. He spoke no English. They spoke no French. But somehow, understanding was built between gestures and tones. He drew lines in the dirt with a stick, pointed toward the woods, and mimed a rifle. Germans? Maybe. He didn't stay long. He nodded once, touched his cap, and disappeared the way mist does quietly, as if he had never been there. They repositioned themselves near the tree line, just in case. As the night drew in, sounds returned. Distant mortar fire. The occasional crack of rifle shots far to the north. Nothing close, but close enough to remind them that the war still remembered their names. Willy took the midnight watch, sitting beneath a knotted apple tree with branches like tired arms. He opened his journal and wrote, "White horse. Apple from a stranger. I can't read. Goat story made me laugh." He paused, then added, "Want to remember what laughter feels like." He closed the book and leaned back, eyes following a single moth circling the lantern hung from a broken branch. It fluttered, bumped against the glass, tried again. A soft, persistent thing, kind of like them. The orchard fell into silence, a good silence, the kind that came not from fear, but from shared survival, from the knowledge that just for now, They were alive, they were breathing, and the war had let them keep this one small, strange piece of the world for one more night. The apples, the letter, the goat, the laughter all folded into the story like pressed flowers in a book. And just beyond the ridge, the moon began to rise quiet, round, and watching Dot, it was the kind of morning that didn't ask permission to arrive. It just slid into the world without knocking. No sunburst, no trumpets, just a pale gray light slowly replacing the dark, like someone repainting the sky with a wet brush. Willy opened his eyes to find dew gathered on the collar of his jacket and the outline of a half-eaten apple beside him in the grass. A few birds chirped above, hesitant, cautious, as if waiting to see if the war was listening. It wasn't cold, not really, but the kind of damp that lives inside your bones had settled into everything. The orchard smelled of soil and forgotten sweetness. A pair of crows was fighting over something in the distance, a crust of bread or a memory. The rangers moved slowly that morning, with the heaviness of bodies not quite rested and the knowledge that rest wasn't the point. Becker ordered them east. New objective, he said quietly. Bridge near La Graverie. Still standing for now. For now. The route took them through patches of wild grass, old fences, and the occasional scarecrow slumped in the corner of a fallow field. One wore a scarf, oddly clean. Another had boots that looked too real. They didn't check. Better not to know. The bridge was 6 kilometers out, spanning a narrow river that had once powered a mill. Now it was just a crossing point tactically vital, emotionally empty. They approached from the south, staying low, weaving through a line of hedgerows that followed the curves of the land like scars. At one bend, Willy spotted a doll's head resting on a flat rock. Its painted smile was chipped, its eyes closed, as if still pretending to sleep. He looked away. The bridge came into view in the early afternoon. Stone arches, moss-covered. Surprisingly intact. Too intact. That made them suspicious. Becker sent 2 forward to scout Willy and Keen. They moved slowly, crawling part of the way, checking the riverbanks for wires, charges, trip triggers. And they found them. Not many, but enough. German engineers had begun setting demolitions, but hadn't finished. Perhaps they'd been interrupted. Perhaps they'd run. A soft breeze moved through the trees like a sigh of relief. Becker gave the order. Disarm the charges, hold the bridge, and wait. The rangers got to work. Willy snipped wires with a pair. Of shaking hands, breath held like it might break something. Each click of the cutter was a soft prayer. When the last device was pulled, they piled the explosives in a ditch and covered them with a tarp. The bridge was theirs now, for the moment. They took up positions along both ends, turning an ancient passageway into a temporary fortress. A few sandbags were laid, rifles propped, eyes squinted toward tree lines, but nothing came. Not yet. Willy sat beneath a stone railing and stared down into the river. The water moved like melted glass, slow and thick. Fish swam below, indifferent to the men above. He wondered what it would be like to fall in. Would the river be cold? Would it carry him? Would it remember his name? Probably not. Rivers don't. Keep ledgers. That night, Becker lit a small fire beneath a sheet of tin to keep the glow hidden. They warmed rations, passed around a can of peaches one of the men had saved since Omaha. The juice tasted like syrup in silence. No one spoke for a long while. Then someone told a story about growing up near a bridge, just like this one, and how they used to throw stones off the side to make wishes. I wished for a red bicycle once, he said. Did you get it? Someone asked. No, he said, smiling. Got drafted instead. They all laughed not loudly, but enough to make the trees lean in. As sleep returned in slow rotations, Willy took his watch at the center of the bridge, sitting with his legs dangling over the edge. The moonlight made the water below look like it was breathing. He pulled out his journal and wrote, "Doll's Head. Bridge safe. River won't remember us. Laughed tonight." Then he paused. After a moment, he added, "Still afraid, but quieter now." He tucked the book away, closed his eyes for a moment, and listened to the sound of water. Not rushing, not gurgling, just moving. Like time, like breath, like the quiet hope that something would survive all this. And as the stars began their slow crawl across the sky, Willy leaned his head back, letting the world turn without him. Just for a while, there were footsteps in the woods, maybe. A fox yipping far away. But for now, the bridge was still standing. And so were they. And tomorrow, like the river, would come either way soft, strange, and filled with everything they still didn't know. Some mornings arrived like questions that had no answer. The sun, weak and unwilling, peeked through thin clouds with the timidity of a child asking for forgiveness. Willy stood at the bridge's midpoint, helmet off, letting the breeze ruffle his hair, what little was left of it under weeks of sweat and grime and fatigue. Below, the river whispered again, brushing gently against the stone as if trying to erase their footprints from the banks. But rivers forget and bridges remember. That's what it felt like. The bridge still held the weight of every boot that had crossed it. Maybe it always would. The Rangers were preparing to move out. Orders had come in via radio crackle. Hold the eastern approach to Vire until the engineers could catch up. It meant another march, more hedgerows, more waiting. No one sighed, no one groaned. They just packed. It was a strange thing, how obedience became its form of silence. Before leaving, Willy walked the length of the bridge one more time. On the far side, he found something left behind, a small chalk drawing on the stone, barely visible. A flower, 5 uneven petals and a short stem, drawn by a child perhaps, or a soldier trying to remember softness. He knelt and ran his fingers over it, then rose and left it as it was untouched, like a prayer. They moved along an old farm, road lined with apple trees. The fruit above them hung heavy and low, but no one reached for it. Even hunger, by now, had become a background noise, dull, persistent, ignored. They passed a barn that had burned, its skeleton still warm in places. Inside, a bicycle frame fused to a pitchfork. In the field beyond, a single goat stared at them, unblinking. Lutz murmured, "Told you they're spies," and someone chuckled. A joke, even a weak one, still had power. As they crossed a field of tall grass, Becker ordered a halt. They'd stumbled onto a minefield not marked, not mapped, but real. A slow, careful backtrack followed, one footstep at a time. No one panicked. It was almost like a slow dance, the kind done in socks on a hardwood floor, careful and precise. Once out, they rested by a broken stone wall, just for a few minutes. Willy sat with his back to the rocks and pulled out his journal. Minefield dance. Goat again. Chalk flower. Then he drew a box around those words and underlined them, unsure why. A plane passed overhead American, friendly, dipping low and fast. It left behind the smell of fuel and the distant hope of more reinforcements. That hope didn't speak out loud. It just settled like dust on their shoulders. By early afternoon, they reached a cluster of abandoned homes. One had a door hanging on one hinge, the sound of it creaking in the breeze, eerily rhythmic. Another house had writing on the wall, "Je suis encore là, I am still here." Becker nodded at it once, but said nothing. They took shelter inside for the night. Willy found a second-floor room with half a roof missing. He could see the stars again. Strange how familiar they had become. They weren't a source of wonder, now just quiet witnesses. He lay on a pile of dry straw, the scent earthy and oddly comforting. In the corner of the room was a child's crib, empty, with a small wool blanket folded neatly inside. It looked untouched, preserved, a pocket of memory that war had passed over. He didn't move it. He just sat beside it for a while, fingers gently brushing the wood. Downstairs, the men ate cold beans from a shared can. Someone found a dusty deck of cards, and a slow, half-hearted game began. The rules were forgotten. No one cared. It wasn't about winning. It was about the shuffle, the motion, the act of pretending for a few minutes that something made sense. That night, as the moon settled behind the scorched outline of the hills, Willy wrote, "Still here, roof open, crib untouched, cards like sleepwalking." He closed the book, set it beside the crib, and lay back, hands behind his head. For a moment, he let himself pretend that the stars above him were just stars, not watchers, not metaphors, just cold, bright things doing their job. Somewhere in the distance, artillery thudded once, then silence again. In that stillness, Willy listened to his breath, the one sound he could trust completely. He let it slow, let it deepen, let the day melt off his skin like rainwater on a warm window. The war, for now, had nothing more to say, and the Rangers, cocooned inside crumbling stone and whispers, floated gently toward sleep. Tomorrow would be another mile, another town, another bridge, maybe. But tonight, under the soft hum of memory and the occasional creak of an old crib's ghost, they were simply men who had not yet been forgotten. And in that truth, small and sacred, they rested. There's a peculiar clarity that follows deep exhaustion, the kind where the body is too tired to resist, and the mind begins to notice things it normally wouldn't, the way light filters through. Cracks in old walls, or how the dust dances in a single beam of sun, as if trying to tell a secret. Willy awoke in the half-roofed room, arms folded over his chest, eyes staring at nothing in particular. The child's crib still sat untouched. Beside him, its silence heavier than most conversations. For a moment, he imagined what kind of lullaby had once been sung in this room, before the uniforms, before the boots. The wind carried the faint scent of hay and something sweet, like old lavender. Downstairs, boots shuffled. Becker had already outlined the morning's orders. Move east, push through the woodland corridor south of Vire, link up with a mechanized unit, and prepare for a possible German counteroffensive. It sounded more official than it felt. Outside, the landscape was a quilt of soft hills and charred treetops, the kind that once promised quiet country walks and now whispered warnings with every step. The Rangers set out after a breakfast of biscuit crumbs and black coffee that had to be chewed more than sipped. As they passed the writing on the wall, "Je suis encore là," no one said a word. They simply nodded to it, like an old friend who didn't need reintroductions. The woodland ahead was dense, darker than expected, with twisted trees that arched over the trail like ribs. The path narrowed quickly, becoming more of a tunnel than a road. Shadows moved in peculiar ways here. Every bird call echoed twice. The world felt hollow, like it had been carved out and not yet refilled. Willy walked near the middle of the line, his steps careful, ears tuned to every snapped twig and rustle. At one bend, they found a German helmet resting on a tree stump, upside down. Inside it, a handful of moss, a feather, and a gold wedding band. No one touched it. They moved on. Not long after, the trees opened onto a clearing, a shallow ravine, littered with broken crates and twisted bicycles. German supplies, hastily abandoned. The smell of fuel lingered in the air, like a song halfway through its final note. Becker ordered a perimeter check. Willy and Keene moved toward the far edge, rifles raised but loose in their hands. They found a single German soldier asleep or unconscious beneath a tree, his uniform stained with sweat and soil. His weapon lay beside him, untouched. He didn't stir. Becker made the call. Take him alive. They bound his hands gently but firmly and offered water. He drank without speaking. His eyes were blank, not in terror, but as though the world had grown too loud to hear anymore. Back at the clearing, the rangers set up a temporary observation post, using the broken crates as cover. Someone found a crate of canned sausages, and for the first time in days, the men chewed with genuine hunger. Willy sat on an overturned crate, the sun pressing warm fingers against his back. He opened his journal and scribbled. Wedding band and helmet. Sausages good. The prisoner. Didn't blink. Trees whisper lies. Then, as an afterthought, not sure if I blinked either. That afternoon, the prisoner spoke. His name was Matthias. He'd been conscripted, he said, from a small town near the Rhine. He had 2 daughters. He used to repair bicycles. And he hated the war. Becker listened quietly, then offered him a corner of bread and left him under guard. Willy watched the man, wondering if his daughters had the same nervous smile he wore now, that blend of relief and confusion. Later, they moved out again, following a narrow stream that cut through the trees like a silver thread. At one bend, a line of boots had been placed neatly. Along the water's edge, 8 pairs, side by side, laces tucked inside. No bodies, no gear, just boots. It felt like an offering, or a ritual too private to understand. Willy looked away. By evening, they reached a small farmstead abandoned in haste. A chicken still wandered the yard, clucking softly, unaware of the war. One ranger tried to catch it, missed, and tripped into a flower bed. The others laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like a choice. They set camp inside the farmhouse. Willy found a bedroom upstairs untouched by war. A bed still made, a photograph of a couple in wedding clothes on the knitstand, a cracked music box that played a lullaby he couldn't name. He left it open, let it play until the spring ran. Out, as darkness crept over the farm, the sky turned the color of wet stone. A fox padded across the field beyond the barn, pausing only to look at them, eyes glowing faintly in the lantern light. It didn't run. It simply vanished into the tall grass, as if war had never learned its scent. That night, as the men settled into blankets and jackets, Willy sat at the window and wrote by candlelight. Fox again. Matthias repairs bicycles. The music box sounded tired. I don't know what the boots mean. Then he stared at the flame, watched it flicker against the page. He didn't close the journal, just left it open beside him, as if the story hadn't finished writing itself. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, pulling loose a few dry leaves. They danced in the air before falling silently to the earth. No sound, no fuss, just the gravity of things finding their place. And in that softness, in that slow unfurling of another day left behind, the rangers lay still, wrapped in dreams that were no longer about victory or escape, but simply about waking up again. One more time, in a world still trying to remember how to be whole. Morning came with the smell of old wood and damp straw. The farmhouse roof had held mostly, so Willy woke without raindrops tapping his cheeks, which somehow made the air inside feel even stiller. He sat up slowly, every joint reminding him of the march, the hedgerows, the mud-soaked boots, and the slow, steady burden of survival. The music box on the dresser had stopped, its final note caught forever mid-hum. Downstairs, the others were already stirring. Becker stood near the hearth, going over orders that had been passed in by courier handwritten. Mud-streaked, barely legible. There would be a push toward the outskirts of Weyer proper, and the rangers were to flank south to intercept any German retreat from the city. It wasn't a glamorous mission, but no one was looking for glory. They were looking for something they couldn't name. As the men prepped their gear, Willy wandered through the farmhouse one last time. He paused in the kitchen, where a cracked teacup sat upside down on a saucer, and someone had pinned a recipe card to the wall apple tart, written in slanted, looping French. Flour dust still clung to the corner of the counter. He imagined the last hands that had touched it. Maybe someone had been baking when the trucks arrived. Maybe they dropped the rolling pin mid-step. He walked out quietly, as if not to disturb the memory. The road south was more of a trail now, lined with tangled brush and the ghosts of farm wagons. They moved in single file, listening for snipers, for mines, for the sound of things that didn't belong. It was Becker who spotted it first, a dog collar caught in a barbed wire fence, dangling like a broken bell. He untangled it gently and dropped it into his coat pocket without a word. The town of Neuville-sur-Vire lay ahead. Partially collapsed, its center square blackened from recent shelling. They approached it in silence, rifles raised, eyes sharp. A few crows flapped from a broken steeple. One man whistled, but not for attention, just a tune slow and tuneless. The buildings here weren't abandoned so much as paused. Blankets still lay folded on beds. Bicycles leaned on gates. A loaf of bread sat on a windowsill, covered in mold. The people had left or vanished. Willy peered into one room where a child's chair had been set neatly in front of a book. The book was open, the pages curled like dried leaves. It was poetry Baudelaire, he thought. The kind of thing people read slowly, with tea. The kind of thing you don't run from unless you have to. They found a body in the alley. German. Young, no weapon nearby. A photograph in his hand again. A girl and a dog. These soldiers were not made of nightmares, Willy thought. They were made of the same clay, just shaped differently. He didn't take the photo. He closed the boy's eyes and whispered something he didn't remember learning. They moved on. A church tower nearby had crumbled halfway, revealing its bell, like a tooth kicked loose. Inside, candles had melted down into puddles. Someone had scrawled words on the altar. Pardon his noose. Forgive us. Willy didn't know who it was meant for. The Rangers camped in the ruins that night, arranging themselves among pews and shattered icons. The rain came again, steady and cold. They made tea from dry leaves someone found in a canister and passed it around, sipping from tin cups with hands that shook not from fear, but from the echo of effort. Becker carved something into the base of the pulpit, a simple cross, and beneath it, the word still. That was all. Just still. Willy sat against a cracked pillar and watched the shadows climb the walls. He pulled out his journal and wrote, "Apple tart recipe. Baudelaire in a child's chair." "Forgive us," someone said. Becker wrote, "Still. I think we are." Outside, the wind howled once, then died. The rain slowed. Someone began to snore softly in the next row. A crow settled in the rafters, blinking slowly like a priest left to watch over a congregation that had long since fled. Willy leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He thought of the girl from the photograph, of the dog, of the recipe pinned to the wall. These fragments didn't fit into any neat story, but they clung to him anyway. He let the noise of memory grow softer, let the war drift further away, just for a few hours. Around them, the town did not stir. And inside the quiet walls of that broken church, with its puddles and prayers and boots and breath, the Rangers slept, not like men waiting for morning, but like ghosts wrapped in the warmth of what little remained. The night asked no questions, and they gave it no answers. Willy woke to the scent of cold stone and burned wax, the kind that clung to old churches and tired memories. Light filtered in through the broken windows of the chapel, thick, with dust and sleep. Around him, the rangers stirred like slow-moving shadows, brushing dirt from jackets, tying boots with practiced silence. No one spoke of dreams anymore, though some of the men still clenched their fists in sleep, as if trying to hold on to something they weren't ready to let go of. Becker crouched near the pulpit, staring at the word he had carved the night before, still. It looked both defiant and exhausted now, like a flag planted in soft earth. Breakfast was a few dry crackers, and half a tin of beans passed around without ceremony. The mission hadn't changed. Push east. Secure the eastern edge of Vire. Hold the line until someone with stripes higher than theirs said otherwise. They moved out with the gray sky overhead and the echo of rain still tucked into their collars. The streets of Neuville-sur-Vire were empty, but not quiet. Crows spoke in bursts. Window panes rattled in empty frames. Somewhere, water dripped steadily. From a gutter. The town hadn't surrendered. It had simply stopped waiting. As they passed a bakery with shattered glass, Lutz tapped the doorframe and murmured, "The place probably smelled amazing once." No one responded, but a few slowed their steps. Imagination had become more important than memory. They reached the eastern fields by noon broad, open spaces lined with barbed wire and the carcasses of old farm tools. There, Becker spotted movement. A boy, maybe 10 years old, running across a narrow bridge, barefoot. No uniform, no weapon. Just a blur of limbs and fear. 2 rangers chased, but stopped when he vanished into the tall grass. No one followed. If he was running from something, they didn't want to be what he ran into next. They reached a farmhouse near the edge of the forest and took shelter for the evening. The building had been abandoned and haste chairs overturned, stew still, hardened in a pot on the stove. On the wall, someone had drawn tallies in charcoal. 6 columns, 5 marks each. Willy counted 30. He didn't know what they meant. Maybe nights spent there. Maybe people lost. Maybe hopes stacked like cordwood. In the upstairs room, he found a mirror that hadn't cracked. He stared into it for a long time. His face looked older than it should have, darker, thinner, the kind of face you only see in old photographs of people who didn't survive the last act. He raised a hand, touched the glass, then let it fall. In the yard, someone had planted flowers, roses, bluebells, and a strange white bloom Willy didn't recognize. They still stood tall, even now. Nature, it seemed, hadn't surrendered. The rangers dug in as evening fell, fortifying the area with old furniture and sandbags from a German post nearby. That night, the air was thick with the scent of turned soil and worn canvas. Becker shared a tin of sardines no one wanted, but they passed it anyway. Lutz, now fully bandaged and a little paler, told a story about how his brother used to steal pies from a windowsill in the Bronx and blame it on their neighbor's dog. The dog ran away eventually, he added, probably tired of the lies. That earned a real laugh. The kind that didn't echo, but stayed close, warm. Willy sat by the fireplace, writing in his journal, "Boy on bridge. 30 tallies." The mirror showed me something tired. Flowers still blooming. He paused, then added, Lutz laughed. It helped. Outside, the forest whispered in the dark. Branches creaked like old floorboards. A deer passed through the clearing just after. Midnight, silent and weightless, seen only by Willy's half-awake eyes. He didn't move, just watched. It blinked, paused, and continued. That moment, soft, small, unremarkable, was somehow the most human thing he'd seen in days. As the others snored and murmured in sleep, Willy lay down on a pile of coats and let the smell of pine and damp stone cradle him. His boots were still muddy, his hands blistered, but his breath came evenly. The war hadn't stopped, but tonight it had stepped back a little, as if recognizing the weariness in its reflection. And in that rare hush between thunderclaps, the rangers drifted into a sleep deep enough to remember dreams, if only for a while. Tomorrow, there will be noise again. Steel and smoke, orders and echoes. But for now, there was only this farmhouse, these flowers, this fire. A moment stretched like a thread between two storms. A pause that felt like mercy. By the time the sun arrived, the world had already decided it wouldn't be warm. The morning. Light crept in behind the farmhouse, diffused and pale, the color of old parchment left too long in the rain. Willy sat on the edge of the porch, boots still damp, watching a line of ants trail across a broken plank. They moved with purpose, with more coordination than any battalion he'd seen in days. Inside, Becker reread the orders 3 times, though nothing had changed. The mission ahead was simple and brutal. Advance toward the industrial outskirts. Avire and intercept a retreating German unit expected to regroup near the rail yard. If it's moving, the last line of the order read, "Stop it." The men didn't flinch. They packed what was left of their rations, checked ammunition, tightened straps, and fell into formation. There was no bravado, no rallying cry. Just the same quiet rhythm that had become a second language. As they moved east, the terrain shifted. The soft curves of farmland gave way to sharper outlines, gravel roads, collapsed warehouses, telephone wires snapped and dangling like tired arms. A billboard still stood at the edge of town, advertising something in bright colors, now faded to ghostly hues. The smiling woman on the sign had no eyes anymore, just weathered paint and cracked smiles. They passed a bombed-out tram station, where suitcases lay half open, clothing spilling like intestines across the concrete. One bag held only socks. Another, a child's toy train with one wheel missing. Willy slowed to look at it, but didn't stop. The road was lined with burned-out trucks, the smell of fuel old but still present. Birds had begun nesting in the wheel wells. Nature was reclaiming the war, one feather at a time. Becker called a halt when they reached a ridge that overlooked the rail yard. Below, boxcars stood in crooked lines, doors open, empty. A few German soldiers could be seen retreating into a building at the far end. No heavy weapons, no tanks, just men moving like whispers. The Rangers spread out, set up positions behind old cement blocks and twisted rebar. Becker gave the signal. 3 shots rang out clean, practiced, surgical. The Germans disappeared behind the structure, and then silence. For the next hour, it was a waiting game. No return fire, no movement, just wind playing with the shredded flags atop a rusted crane. Willy sat behind a concrete barrier, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning every window. He could feel the tension beneath his skin, not panic, but pressure like water held behind glass. Lutz leaned against the same slab, humming a half-tune. "Keeps the nerves down," he said, like singing to yourself when you're walking past a cemetery. Willy nodded, but said nothing. Eventually, Becker ordered a sweep. They moved in cautiously, crossing the gravel in slow steps, boots crunching on shattered glass and coiled wire. The building was clear. The Germans had left completely. A kettle still steamed on a hot plate. A pair of boots waited beside a bedroll. A letter lay open on a cot, written in long, looping German script. Becker folded it gently and placed it in his jacket pocket. He didn't read it aloud. In the corner of the room, someone had drawn a map on the floor in chalk. Routes. Names. One arrow pointing north with the word Zoo House Home. Willy stared at it for a long time. Outside, the sky had darkened again. Rain came, light at first, then heavier. The men took shelter inside the warehouse. They found crates of old coal, a broken radio, and a stack of French newspapers tied with twine. One headline, barely legible, read, La fin est proche? Is the end near? No one answered. That night, they lit a fire in an oil drum and passed around bits of biscuit and dried meat. Someone poured hot water over loose tea leaves they'd found in the farmhouse and called it coffee. It tasted like hope diluted in ash. Willy took first watch near the rail cars, listening to the metal creak in the cold. He opened his journal and wrote, Toy train, letter on the cot, map pointing home, billboard smile with no eyes. Then, more slowly, he added, It's not over, but it's not the same anymore. As midnight rolled in, the rain softened again. The rail yard grew still. Willy watched steam rise from the cracked pavement and imagined the station as it had once been, families waving goodbye, soldiers boarding with fresh uniforms, porters calling out destinations with voices that hadn't yet learned to whisper. The past was loud. Now, everything was quiet. A fox ran across the tracks, tail high, vanishing between the cars. A figure on guard shifted and coughed softly. The fire crackled once, and in that space between the raindrops and the sigh of cooling, steel, Willy let his eyes close just for a second. The war would still be there when he opened them again. But for now, in this strange metal graveyard of wheels and stories, they had found another breath, another pause, another night survived. The morning began not with sunlight, but with a low whistle. Kind of breath the earth seemed to let out. When no one was watching, Willy opened his eyes slowly, unsure if he had actually slept or merely drifted into a lighter kind of silence. The rail yard was quiet, but not still. Steam hissed from rusted pipes like old lungs coughing memories into the gray air. Somewhere a crow called, sharp and brief, then was swallowed by the sound of the wind moving through the skeletal remains of metal and wire. The rangers stirred from their scattered resting places around the yard, shoulders hunched, faces drawn tight by cold and fatigue. Becker stood on the edge of a boxcar roof, scanning the eastern horizon with field glasses, his silhouette outlined against the sky like a weathered statue. Orders were simple today. Move south. Follow the tracks toward the forest line. Link. Up with a supply convoy stalled near a flooded crossing. No known resistance. But known had lost its meaning weeks ago. As they walked, the gravel crunched beneath their boots with that rhythmic, endless sound, a broken lullaby of iron and stone. Along the way, they passed signs of hasty departures. Coffee still warm in a chipped mug left on a siding post. A typewriter sitting alone on a bench, its keys missing letters, spelling nothing at all. At one siding platform, someone had scribbled onto the wall in English, "Tell her I tried." Just that. No name, no context. Just a sentence hanging in the air like unfinished music. Willy paused and stared at it. He didn't need to know who wrote it. He already understood. As the sun rose behind thick clouds, they passed through a stretch of tall reeds that had begun to reclaim the tracks. Nature, always patient, had started patching the wounds humans hadn't finished making. Lutz commented that it reminded him of the back lot behind his school, where weeds always grew, faster than the janitor could cut them. Someone chuckled. It sounded like it belonged to someone else. By midday, they reached the stalled convoy. 2 trucks sank halfway into the muddy edge of a stream, tires spinning hopelessly. The drivers were jumpy but grateful. And the supply? Sergeant, a short man with fingers stained from engine grease, shook every ranger's hand as if memorizing their faces. "We got chocolate," he said. "No promises, but it's real." And it was dry, chalky, but sweet. They passed pieces around like holy wafers. One man cried after his first bite, not loud, just quiet tears into his sleeve, as if the taste had pulled a thread too tightly from the past. They helped dig out the wheels using broken boards, torn jackets, and sheer stubbornness. It took 3 hours. No one complained. They'd learned the language of effort without expectation. As the trucks lurched free, Becker tapped Willy on the shoulder and pointed to a nearby stone wall, half buried in ivy. On it, someone had etched a date and a name. Clara, June 1923. Below it, a crude drawing of 2 hands holding each other. Willy took a photo with his eyes and tucked it into the folds of his mind. The convoy moved on. The Rangers followed on foot. In the late afternoon, they passed a burned chapel, its bell twisted into a corkscrew shape. Inside, a single bench remained intact. On it lay a child's shoe and a wilted lily. Becker didn't order a stop, but everyone slowed anyway. No one touched the shoe. The road beyond was lined with fence posts carved into strange symbols, hearts, crosses, something like stars. It could have meant anything. It could have meant everything. That night, they camped at the edge of a hill, overlooking a distant valley, flickering with movement artillery, maybe. Or just trees shifting in the wind. Hard to tell anymore. Willy sat beside a half-burned tree and opened his journal. Tell. Her eye tried. Shoe on the bench. Real chocolate. Hands carved in stone. Artillery looks like fireflies. Then he stopped. His hand hovered. He added, I miss how the world used to be surprising in good ways. The fire tonight was small and hidden. The stars above were shy, peeking between clouds. Becker told a story about the time he got caught sneaking into a movie theater back home. Worst part, he said, was I got caught halfway into the best scene. Never found out how it ended. The others nodded. They understood. War was made of half-finished stories, of doors left open, of endings stolen before the music stopped. Someone began humming, not a tune anyone recognized, but soft and low, like the kind of sound a mother might make while folding laundry. Willy closed his eyes and let the hum carry him. He imagined the hands on the wall, Clara, and someone else, fingers locked, together in a promise made before the world cracked open. The wind brushed past like a coat being draped over his shoulders. He didn't flinch. He just breathed. The war hadn't ended, but it had paused again, just long enough for a boy with mud on his boots and ghosts in his eyes to feel like maybe, for a second, he was human. And in that second, sleep arrived, quiet, uninvited, and strangely kind. The wind shifted sometime, just before dawn. Not much, but enough to carry new scents through the hilltop camp. Pine, wet leather, distant smoke, and something metallic that didn't belong to morning. Willy stirred awake before his eyes opened, his body already cataloging the world in muscle memory. When he finally looked around, the hill was still cloaked in fog, but the outlines of sleeping men and the coals of the fire whispered that the world had not vanished, just softened. He sat up slowly, joints groaning, and stretched his arms. To the sky, which remained stubbornly gray, his fingers brushed the cool dampness of the tree, bark behind him. The half-burned tree from the night before still stood sentinel, blackened but rooted. Becker paced near the ridge, boots crunching dry twigs, binoculars in hand. "Me move soon," he muttered. Willy nodded. That was always true. The objective for the day was vague. Secure the hamlet of Montchauvet before dusk, ensure the roads remained open, and observe for enemy activity. In other words, walk, watch, and try not to die. The Rangers packed with the same methodical silence they had grown into, like monks preparing for a ritual. Their church was the path, and their prayers were whispered behind stitched lips and twitching fingers. The trail led down from the ridge through a series of hollow lanes where tree roots tangled above like ceiling beams, and bird calls echoed like distant coughs. The mud was deeper here. Every step pulled slightly, as if the ground wanted to remember each footprint for later. Along the way, they passed the remains of an ambulance, turned on its side and adage markings rimming. Just twisted metal and a single white boot still upright inside the wreck. Willy didn't ask who it had belonged to. The wind didn't answer. As they neared the village, signs of conflict increased: shell craters half filled with rainwater, spent casings embedded in tree trunks, and black scorch marks across the side of a barn. But Montchauvet itself seemed suspended in time. They approached from the north, through fields of high grass dotted with sunflowers that had bloomed without permission. The houses were small, clustered together like people afraid to stand alone. Smoke curled from one chimney. Becker ordered caution. 2 teens moved in, checking doors, sweeping alleyways. Nothing. No Germans. No resistance. Just silence. Inside the baker's house, the oven was still warm. A pie, half-burned, sat forgotten on the windowsill. In the church, a hymn book lay open on the pulpit, its pages fluttering as if some invisible hand still turned. Them. Willy stepped inside a tailor shop and found bolts of fabric draped like sleeping ghosts. On one table, a wedding suit was half-stitched. The thread still looped through the needle. He touched nothing. That afternoon, they climbed to the bell tower. From there, the valley opened before them, a carpet of farms, hedgerows, and distant plumes of smoke marking artillery or burned. Fields. Through the cracked lens of the spotting scope, Willy saw a horse-drawn cart moving down the road far to the east. No uniform, no flag, just a figure hunched over reins, moving slowly toward somewhere unnamed. Later, in the town hall basement, they discovered a small room used as a shelter. Blankets folded, candles melted into saucers. On one wall, someone had etched Talley's 87 strokes. Each stroke a night? A soul? A heartbeat? No one speculated aloud. Becker took first watch. The rest rested where they could on church pews, under tables, wrapped in coats. Lutz played a few soft notes on his harmonica, but the sound fell too, big in the stillness, and faded quickly. Willy found a chair near the window and opened his journal. Boot in ambulance. The pie is still warm. Still warm. 87 marks. Suit unfinished. Sunflowers are stubborn. He tapped the pen once against the page, then wrote, "I don't know what winning feels like anymore." Outside, the village remained silent, but not empty. Shadows shifted as the day softened into evening. Cats returned to windowsills. A bicycle wheel spun lazily in a gust of wind. The place breathed, slowly, carefully, like it was still deciding whether to trust the quiet. That night, they lit no fire. The moon was enough. Willy watched it through the slats of the shuttered window, its light fractured but steady. He imagined what it must look like from somewhere far away New York, maybe, or a field in Kansas. Somewhere the war had not touched. He tried to picture someone there, looking up at the same moon, unaware that beneath it, a village sat full of whispers and unfinished things. He wrote one last line in his book. "There are no enemies here tonight, only echoes." Then he tucked it into his coat, leaned his head against the wood, and let the stillness hold him. Outside, the field stretched on, quiet and deep. The war still lived beyond the hills. But for now, in Montchauvet, the world had given them one gentle breath. And in that breath, the Rangers slept not because they trusted it, but because they needed to believe that somewhere, however briefly, the war had forgotten them. Sleep, when it came that night, arrived not like a blanket, but like a pause short, cautious, and easily broken. Willy woke before dawn in the same wooden chair by the shuttered window, the imprint of the crossbeam pressed into the side of his neck. Outside, the world was still gray, the kind of gray that didn't promise anything, neither rain nor sun, neither danger nor safety, just the color of waiting. He stood slowly, back aching, legs stiff, boots cold to the touch. Across the room, Lutz was already awake, gently twisting the reed on his harmonica, as if preparing it for a conversation he hadn't yet decided to have. Becker sat near the door, eyes half closed, cradling a mug of something too weak to be called, coffee and too bitter to be ignored. The rest of the Rangers stirred one by one, rising like old men from chairs they'd never chosen to sit in. Word had come through just before dawn. Move south to St. Sever Calvados. German forces had pulled back from Bayer overnight, and now the Rangers were to advance, make contact, and assist in securing the area. The instructions were clear. The road, as always, was not. They left Montchauvet in silence. No one wanted to break whatever fragile peace the village had offered. Willy glanced back once and saw the sunflowers bending slightly in the wind, as if nodding them along. The fields gave way to woods dense, quiet, the kind of forest that listened when you breathed. The path was narrow, flanked by brambles and hollowed tree trunks. Birds followed them in brief bursts of motion. Somewhere, water trickled beneath moss-covered stones, its rhythm steady and unhurried. Along the trail, they passed a child's red scarf tangled in a thorn bush. No blood, no footprints, just fabric, fading. Someone removed it gently and folded it into a pocket, not as a souvenir, more like a promise. Near midday, they crossed. A clearing where an overturned cart had spilled its contents, wooden toys, hand-carved and painted. Horses, soldiers, birds. Some broken, others whole. One, a ballerina, still held her balance on a thin wire stand. Arms raised, chipped but smiling. Willy knelt beside it, touched the edge of her skirt, and whispered, "Still dancing, huh?" before setting her upright and continuing. St. Sever came into view in the late afternoon, crouched against the forest like a secret waiting to be. Kept, smoke rose from 2 chimneys. A church bell lay cracked in the grass beside its tower. The town had been shelled, but it had not fallen. A group of civilians waited near the main square. Older women, a few children, and one man with a butcher's apron still tied around his waist. They watched the Rangers arrive with expressions that held both relief and fatigue. No cheers, no waving flags, just nods, as if to say, "We knew you'd come, but we've already buried the dead." Becker spoke with a woman in a gray shawl who pointed toward a house at the edge of town. "I left this morning," she said in broken English. "But some stayed in the hills." The Rangers spread out, checking homes, clearing alleyways. In one basement, they found a small stash of food and a Bible open to Psalms. The passage underlined read, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Willy ran his fingers over the page. It was warm, but dry. Outside, he saw 2 children chasing a chicken through the rubble. Their laughter oddly out of place, and exactly what was needed. One tripped and fell, but stood up laughing harder, her knees scraped and muddy. She waved at him. He waved back. The war, for a moment, blinked. The Rangers were told they'd be staying overnight. The house they chose had 1 working door, 2 rooms intact, and a gramophone missing its horn. Someone set up a pot over the fire and dropped in potatoes and dried herbs. The smell was faint, earthy, honest. That night, they sat close together, not out of fear, but from some old instinct of warmth and knowing. Becker produced a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket, the letter they'd found on the cot inn. The rail yard. He read it aloud. It was simple. A man named Eric, writing to his wife Clara, said he hoped to return, that he dreamed of her baking, that he missed the sound of their front gate creaking, that if she saw this letter, he was sorry. He finished reading, folded it again, and placed it on the windowsill. No one spoke for a long time. Willy wrote in his journal, red scarf. Wooden ballerina, Psalm 23, Eric's letter. Girl with muddy knees. Then, for the first time in days, he smiled without knowing why. As the wind moved through the shutters and the fire crackled in its small circle, the house began to feel like something more than shelter. It felt like a memory being built in real time. One thing the war might not erase. Outside, the moon hung low and round, touching rooftops like a mother checking on sleeping children. And in that borrowed quiet, the Rangers rested not just their bodies, but something deeper. Something that still remembers dancing, edders, and the weight of a hand waving back. Maybe you've noticed it too. That silence has a weight. Not an absence, but a presence. Like something that sat beside you all along without asking to be seen. That was the kind of silence that wrapped around the house in St. Sever as the Rangers stirred, awake for what none of them knew would be their final full day together in Normandy. The war, technically, hadn't ended, but something inside it had softened. Orders came as always. Head northeast to meet with a British patrol near Roulers, clear the roadway, and hold for incoming. Supply, but no one rushed. They moved slowly, that morning boots tied carefully, rations packed without hurry, helmets placed on heads like crownless kings. Willy stood by the doorway, watching the fire die out, the last red glow fading like breath against cold glass. On the sill, Eric's letter still lay folded. No one had taken it. No one would. It belonged to the house now. Outside, the roads were soft with yesterday's rain. The cart tracks had filled with water that reflected the sky in wavering silver. As they walked, the village behind them didn't disappear. It simply faded like a dream remembered just enough to miss. The road ahead wound through orchard rows where apples hung heavy and low, almost ready, as if nature had quietly continued while men fought and fell. They passed a wooden cross nailed to a tree. Below it, a tin cup rested upside down, a clumsy candle hardened to its rim. Someone had been remembered there, someone who likely hadn't expected to be. The path narrowed into forest again, damp, spongy, thick with birdsong. It no longer sounded foreign. Even the leaves beneath their boots rustled differently now, less like warnings and more like applause for simply surviving. Around midday, they reached a clearing where two tanks sat abandoned, their treads choked with vines. Graffiti had been scratched onto one in chalk. "G. Tappens," it said. "I'm waiting for you." Willy ran a hand across the rusted flank, the steel warm from the sun. He didn't know who had written it. Maybe someone was still waiting. Maybe someone had stopped. The British patrol met them later that afternoon, near a stone bridge. Their uniforms were cleaner, their boots newer, but their eyes carried the same exhaustion. Introductions were brief. Tea was offered. Maps were exchanged. Becker stood apart, watching the clouds gather at the edge of the horizon. Rain again, soon. Before sundown, Becker pulled Willy aside. "Tomorrow we're pulling. Back. Command's rotating us off the line." His voice was quiet, not surprised, not relieved, just aware. Like someone finally setting down a weight they'd forgotten was strapped to them. That night, the Rangers camped beneath the bridge, their final field night together. No mortar, fire, no enemy movement. Just wind in the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl, with nowhere else to be. Someone opened the last can of peaches. Becker passed out spoonfuls with the kind of reverence usually reserved for relics. They didn't speak of what came next. Not out of fear, but out of kindness. The unknown had become familiar, and familiar strangely sacred. Willy sat near the water and opened his journal one last time. He didn't write much, just names. Not full names, just the ones that mattered. Emmett, Lutz, Keene, Becker, Clara, The boy on the bridge, the girl with muddy knees, the ballerina, the fox, the man who never finished his movie. Then, with his pencil almost out of lead, he wrote, "I was here, and I saw it all." He closed the book and didn't tuck it away. He set it beside the bridge stone, just under the overhang, where rain might find it, but wind could not. If someone else ever found it, fine. If not, that was fine too. The moon was rising again, pale and worn like the pages of something well read. Willy lay on his back, eyes open, hands folded behind his head. All around him, the men breathed not in unison, but close enough to feel like a choir no longer rehearsing. He thought about how strange it was that peace never arrived with a trumpet or a banner. It came in the sound of spoons scraping a can, in boots taken off without a word, in the way someone folded a blanket before lying down on the cold earth. The war hadn't ended, not yet, but something in him had. Not broken, not emptied, just changed. He didn't want to forget, but he didn't want to hold it all forever either. So he let the darkness gather, let the air thicken with sleep and starlight, and let the last thought of the night float somewhere between earth and dream. That being a ranger on D-Day wasn't just about climbing cliffs or firing rifles or marching through ruined towns. It was about seeing the world break and still walking through it with hands open. It was about bearing witness, not just to death, but to life that stubbornly bloomed in between the cracks. And it was about remembering, not with fear, but with quiet, gentle, unshakable. Sleep came not as escape, but as arrival. And for the first time since the landing craft rocked in the channel and the ropes hung from Pointe du Hoc, Willy Harden slept without his rifle in his hands. Just the rhythm of breath, just the curve of the earth, just one last, long, merciful pause.